High in the rugged Vosges Mountains, where the ridgelines rise sharply out of deep forest and where the wind whistles across rocky paths throughout the year, there lies a place whose silence today belies a history of profound suffering. This place, Natzweiler Struthof, stands as the only concentration camp the Nazis established on present-day French soil. Long before its name became associated with torment and secrecy, this region was known for its isolation, its cold winters, and its stark beauty. But beneath this natural landscape, the Nazis saw something else: a remote mountain slope ideal for forced labor, political punishment, and the clandestine disappearance of men and women whose names they wanted erased forever. Today, the site is peaceful. Birds fly above the camp's remnants. The surrounding forest grows thick and vibrant, reclaiming the land that once echoed with the cries of the suffering. But during the war, the stillness was broken by shouts, orders barked in German, the scraping of boots on gravel during endless roll calls, and the groans of prisoners forced to haul heavy stones up and down steep inclines. Natzweiler Struthof was not the largest concentration camp, nor the most industrial, nor the most infamous. But it holds a unique place in the architecture of the Nazi system, a camp conceived not only for exploitation, not only for punishment, but also for the grim purpose of disappearance under one of the most secret directives of the Second World War. To understand Natzweiler Struthof, we must begin with the history of the region itself. The Alsace region of France has long been contested, a borderland with a complex identity shaped by shifting political tides. After the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, Alsace was annexed into the new German Empire. German became the official language. Schools taught German curricula. But in 1918, after World War I, the region returned to France. French returned to classrooms and government. The people of Alsace found themselves adapting yet again, caught between cultures and allegiances. In 1940, when Nazi Germany invaded and defeated France in a matter of weeks, Alsace was once again seized and annexed. This time, the Nazi regime intended not merely to control the area, but to absorb it completely into the Reich. French identity was to be stamped out, and Germanization was enforced with ruthless efficiency. French street names were replaced. French citizens were expelled. Others were forcibly conscripted into German labor battalions or the Wehrmacht itself. Resistance movements emerged, fueled by resentment and a determination to defend French culture. The Nazis responded with arrests, torture, and deportations. It was within this atmosphere of tension and oppression that the SS identified a mountaintop near the village of Natzweiler as the ideal location for a new concentration camp. The key attraction was a large deposit of pink granite discovered nearby. To the SS, this stone represented the foundation of the grand architectural future imagined by Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler. They envisioned cities adorned with monumental structures, buildings, statues, and parade grounds, constructed from granite quarried by prisoners who were worked to the point of collapse and then replaced by new victims. Slave labor was not simply a tool of the Nazi war machine. It was entwined with their vision of a 1,000-year Reich. Planning for the camp began in late 1940. As the SS surveyed the mountain, they saw strategic advantages. The slope was steep, making escape nearly impossible. The altitude ensured harsh winters, which they believed would break prisoners physically and mentally. The surrounding forests provided natural concealment, shielding the camp from the eyes of locals and Allied reconnaissance. The isolation meant fewer witnesses, fewer potential escapes, and greater control. In May 1941, the camp received its first prisoners. They came not from France, but from the Sachsenhausen camp near Berlin. These men, mostly German political prisoners, including communists, social democrats, and others deemed enemies of the regime, were transported to the site long before it resembled a fully functioning camp. Their first task was to build the very structures that would imprison them. With crude tools and without proper equipment, They chopped down trees, leveled terrain, carried logs, and constructed fences. They built barracks under constant SS surveillance, all while enduring exposure to the elements. The work of constructing a concentration camp was itself a form of punishment. Every step, every hammer strike, every lifted plank was an act performed under duress, exhaustion, and fear. The prisoners slept in temporary shelters, often nothing more than wooden frameworks without insulation. Rain soaked their bedding. Cold chilled their bones. Food rations were minimal, little more than thin soup and a small piece of bread. By the time the first completed barracks stood ready in the autumn of 1941, several of the original prisoners had already died of exposure, exhaustion, or beatings. As the camp took shape, the SS installed electric fences, watchtowers, and guard posts. They designated areas for forced labor, storage, and punishment. They built administrative offices, quarters for the guards, and a roll call square that sloped painfully downward. This roll call square, known as the Appellplatz, would become one of the most feared places in the camp. Prisoners were forced to stand there for hours at a time, often in freezing winds, while guards counted and recounted them with deliberate slowness. If someone collapsed, the count would begin again. By autumn 1941, Natzweiler Struthof had begun operating as an official concentration camp under the authority of the Inspectorate of Concentration Camps. The prisoner population slowly grew. Most were political detainees arrested in Germany and occupied territories. Others were individuals labelled asocial, criminal, or undesirable under the Nazi regime's discriminatory laws. But in December 1941, shortly after the camp opened, a new directive was issued that would set Natzweiler apart from many others. This directive became known as the Night and Fog Decree, Nacht und Nebel. The decree, signed by Adolf Hitler, targeted resistance members in occupied territories. The Nazi leadership believed that traditional courts and public executions were too slow and too visible. Resistance fighters could become martyrs. Instead, they wanted these individuals to vanish without a trace. Under the Night and Fog Decree, anyone suspected of resistance activity, including distributing leaflets, sabotaging rail lines, harbouring Allied soldiers, or simply defying German authority, could be arrested and transported to Germany in complete secrecy. Families would not be informed. Prisoners were forbidden from sending letters. Their names were removed from local records. They disappeared into the shadows of the Nazi camp system. Natzweiler Struthof became one of the central camps used to hold these night and fog prisoners. Many of the individuals brought there were French, Belgian, Dutch, and Norwegian resistance members. They arrived blindfolded or transported in sealed trains, cut off entirely from the world they had known. Their treatment was especially harsh. They were isolated in special barracks, often denied access to the limited recreational time offered to other prisoners. The SS guards treated them with exceptional brutality, believing them to be dangerous subversives. The growing prisoner population meant expanding labour demands. The granite quarry, located a short distance from the camp, became the primary site of forced labour. Every day, prisoners marched in formation to the quarry, where they spent long hours chiselling stone, cutting blocks, and hauling heavy loads up steep paths. The work required tremendous physical effort. Many prisoners were not physically prepared for such labour, and their bodies began to deteriorate rapidly. The quarry was a death trap. Rocks slipped from carts, tools broke. Prisoners stumbled on uneven ground. The SS guards were quick to punish anyone who did not meet their expectations. Prisoners were beaten, kicked, or struck with rifle butts. Some were thrown from ledges or forced to carry stones far beyond their weight capacity. Accidents were frequent. Many prisoners suffered broken bones, crushed limbs, or fatal head injuries. Despite the brutality of the quarry, it was only one part of camp life. Prisoners worked in various roles: construction, road building, carpentry, metalwork, and administrative tasks if they were lucky enough to be assigned inside the camp. Some were forced to dig trenches or carry heavy loads for hours without rest. Others sorted supplies or performed maintenance tasks. But for most, the quarry remained the central and most feared destination. By 1942, the camp's population had grown significantly. Prisoners arrived from across Europe. Many were political prisoners, but others were Jews, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, and foreign labourers accused of crimes or defiance. The diversity of the prisoner population created a complex social dynamic within the camp. Some groups clung to shared language or nationality. Others formed bonds across cultural lines. Despite the horrors of the camp, moments of solidarity did occur. Yet the solidarity of prisoners was overshadowed by the cruelty of the SS and the camp administration. Natzweiler Struthof was notorious for its strict discipline. Punishments were meted out for the smallest infractions. Stealing a scrap of bread, failing to stand still during roll call, or even showing signs of fatigue could result in beatings, solitary confinement, or execution. The camp's commandants were known for their ruthlessness. One in particular, Hans Hüttig, had previously served at Sachsenhausen and Buchenwald, and brought with him a reputation for enforcing harsh discipline. Within this environment of terror, another sinister element began to take shape: medical experimentation. The Nazi regime was deeply invested in using human beings as test subjects for scientific purposes, ranging from racial studies to chemical weapons research. Some of the most infamous experiments took place at Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück, but Natzweiler Struthof became a major site for experiments conducted by doctors affiliated with the Reich University of Strasbourg. Chief among these doctors was August Hirt, an anatomist with a chilling vision. Hirt believed that the so-called Jewish race was inferior and scientifically distinct. As Nazi genocidal policies intensified, he argued that Jews were on the verge of extinction, and he wanted to create an anatomical database before, in his view, they disappeared completely. His plan involved collecting the skeletons of Jewish prisoners. In 1943, a group of 86 Jewish men and women were selected for this purpose. Transported to Natzweiler Struthof, they were held separately and ultimately murdered in the camp's gas chamber. Their bodies were then shipped to Strasbourg. Although the war ended before Hirt could complete his project, the bodies were discovered after the liberation of the city, revealing the extent of his grotesque ambitions. Hirt was not the only doctor conducting experiments. Others exposed prisoners to mustard gas and other chemical agents. Victims suffered severe burns, respiratory distress, and long-term organ damage. Some experiments involved infecting prisoners with typhus to test vaccines. Others examined the effects of freezing, dehydration, or altitude sickness. Prisoners were subjected to brutal procedures without anesthesia or post-experiment care. Many died shortly after being experimented on. Those who survived were left with crippling injuries. These experiments were conducted with pseudo-scientific justification. The doctors documented their work meticulously, maintaining notes, sketches, and reports. But beneath the veneer of scientific study lay the unambiguous reality of torture. Meanwhile, the camp continued to expand. By 1943, the SS recognized the strategic importance of forced labor in supporting the war effort. Germany faced increasing shortages of manpower as more soldiers were sent to the front lines. Prisoners became essential laborers for the German economy. In response, the SS began establishing subcamps, satellite camps connected to Natzweiler, scattered across southwestern Germany and Alsace. These subcamps were often located near factories, mines, or tunnel systems where prisoners worked under severe conditions. Subcamps such as Neckarels, Kokendorf, and Vaihingen became notorious in their own right. They were often overcrowded, understaffed, and lacking basic facilities. Prisoners worked long hours in dangerous environments, digging tunnels, assembling aircraft components, or operating machinery. They received almost no medical care. Illness and exhaustion claimed many lives. Guards were often particularly brutal, and deaths were frequent. As the population increased, so too did the suffering. Disease spread rapidly in overcrowded barracks. Lice infestations became chronic. Dysentery outbreaks decimated entire groups of prisoners. Tuberculosis and pneumonia spread among those weakened by malnutrition. The camp infirmary lacked medicine, doctors, and supplies. Many prisoners who were sent there never returned. Despite these horrors, prisoners found ways to resist, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly. They shared food when possible, protected the weakest among them, and worked together to maintain morale. Some prisoners sabotaged machinery or slowed their work as acts of defiance. Others smuggled information to the outside world or recorded the names of the dead, hoping to preserve their memory. Even in the darkest conditions, humanity persisted in small acts of courage. By 1944, the war had turned decisively against Germany. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June, combined with Soviet advances on the Eastern Front, placed enormous pressure on the Nazi regime. The SS began evacuating camps near the front lines to prevent prisoners from being liberated and telling the world what they had seen. On September 1, 1944, the order was given to evacuate Natzweiler Struthof. This marked the beginning of another chapter of suffering. Prisoners were forced onto overcrowded trains or marched long distances to other camps deeper inside Germany. Many died on these journeys, unable to withstand the conditions. Those who reached camps like Dachau or Ravensbrück encountered even more overcrowding and chaos as the Nazi camp system collapsed. On September 23, 1944, the American army reached Natzweiler. What they found shocked them. The camp was nearly empty. Prisoners were gone. Guards had fled. But the physical evidence remained. The crematorium, the gas chamber, the barracks, and the documents scattered in administrative offices. The full truth of the camp's horrors would only be uncovered over time through survivor testimonies, war crimes investigations, and the gradual historical reconstruction of events. In the years that followed, the site of Natzweiler Struthof slowly transformed into a place of remembrance. Families of victims visited. Survivors returned to bear witness. Historians documented the camp's role in the broader Nazi system. The French government preserved the site as a national memorial. Today, visitors can walk through the remaining structures, reflect on the suffering endured, and honor the memory of those who never left the camp's confines. As the war progressed into its third and fourth years, Natzweiler Struthof continued to expand in ways the first prisoners could never have imagined when they arrived in 1941. The camp that had begun as a remote granite extraction site evolved into an extensive network of forced labor camps stretching across large portions of Alsace and southwestern Germany. Yet, even as this system grew, the main camp on the mountainside maintained its central role as the administrative heart, the place where the most politically sensitive prisoners were kept, and the site where some of the most horrific atrocities unfolded. To understand the transformation that took place in 1943 and 1944, it is important to consider what was happening across the entire Nazi concentration camp system. Germany was losing the war. The front lines were inching closer, cities were being bombed, industry was under strain, and an increasingly desperate Nazi leadership sought ways to extract every possible resource from the prisoners in their control. Forced labor became even more essential to their war effort. This shift in priorities led to the proliferation of subcamps. Natzweiler Struthof became one of the most decentralized and widespread systems in the entire concentration camp network. By early 1943, the number of subcamps attached to Natzweiler had grown from a handful to more than 20. By late 1944, that number would rise to over 70. These subcamps varied greatly in size and function. Some housed just a few dozen prisoners working in small factories. Others held thousands forced into deadly labor conditions. Many of these subcamps were located in towns, forests, or industrial zones where Allied aircraft might not immediately suspect that war-critical activities were taking place. One of the largest and most infamous subcamps was located at Neckarells. Situated near the Neckar River in southwestern Germany, this site became a hub for tunnel construction. The Nazis sought to move essential industries underground to protect them from Allied bombing. In the hills surrounding Neckarells, prisoners were forced to carve massive tunnels into the rock. These tunnels would later house factories for aircraft parts, including components for the Messerschmitt fighter planes that Germany relied on to defend its skies. Working conditions in these tunnels were unbearable. Air quality was poor. Dust from the constant drilling and blasting filled the lungs of prisoners, causing respiratory infections and chronic coughing. The tunnels were dark, cold, and frequently damp. Light was limited to scarce electric bulbs or handheld lamps. The noise of machinery and explosions echoed endlessly. Food rations were insufficient for the level of labor required. Many prisoners collapsed from exhaustion. Others were killed in accidents, tunnel cave-ins, machinery malfunctions, or explosions from mishandled charges. Another major subcamp, Cochendorf, expanded rapidly in 1944. This camp supported the armaments industry with prisoner labor in underground factories. Prisoners worked 14-hour days operating heavy machinery with little rest. Cochendorf became notorious for its brutal guards, many of whom were known for beating prisoners for the slightest infractions. Medical facilities were nearly non-existent and diseases spread quickly. In some subcamps, women were held in conditions just as harsh as those of men. Although the main camp at Natzweiler housed male prisoners, female prisoners were sent to certain subcamps, especially those associated with industrial labor. Many of these women were resistance fighters from France, Belgium, or the Netherlands. Others were Jewish women transported from Auschwitz or Ravensbrück. They worked in factories where they assembled weapons, cleaned machinery, or packed munitions. These environments were dangerous and exhausting. Explosions were not uncommon. Several subcamps experienced fatal accidents when munitions detonated unexpectedly. The SS imposed strict discipline in these subcamps, often harsher than in the main camp due to weaker oversight and greater autonomy for local commanders. Prisoners struggled to survive in environments where they were constantly exposed to industrial hazards, starvation, and violence. The growing number of subcamps made it nearly impossible for the already overburdened Natzweiler administrative staff to maintain accurate records. This lack of documentation has complicated historical research, and even today, many details about smaller subcamps remain incomplete. While the subcamps expanded, the main camp at Natzweiler Struthof continued to serve as the central hub for political prisoners, night and fog detainees, and those destined for medical experiments. The camp became increasingly overcrowded. Prisoners slept in cramped barracks where straw mattresses were shared, lice infestation was rampant, and disease spread quickly. The camp latrines overflowed regularly, and sanitation was abysmal. Prisoners often had no access to clean water. These conditions became even worse during winter when freezing temperatures added to the already harsh environment. Roll calls took place twice a day and were dreaded by all. The sloping roll call square made it difficult for prisoners to stand still. The SS guards demanded absolute silence and stillness. Prisoners were forced to stand for hours regardless of weather conditions. Snowstorms, rain, and extreme winds were no excuse for movement. Those who collapsed were beaten. If someone died during roll call, the body was often left lying on the ground until the count was completed. The psychological impact of these roll calls was immense. Prisoners who endured them described hours of mental and physical agony, with exhaustion and hunger gnawing at their strength. Food rations, already minimal, became even more meagre in 1943 and 1944. The standard meal consisted of a slice of bread made with sawdust fillers, a watery soup with occasional scraps of vegetables, and sometimes a small portion of margarine or jam. Prisoners were always hungry. Many scavenged for anything edible: grass, leaves, discarded potato peels. Those who worked in the kitchen sometimes stole small amounts of food to share with others. These acts of solidarity could mean the difference between life and death. Medical conditions in the camp were deplorable. The infirmary often lacked medicine, disinfectant, and basic supplies. Doctors, some prisoners, some SS, performed amputations without anesthesia or adequate surgical instruments. Infections were common, and many prisoners who entered the infirmary never returned. The SS used the infirmary as a place to select prisoners for transportation to gas chambers in other camps, or to be killed by lethal injection. The presence of medical experiments at Natzweiler added another layer of terror. Prisoners lived with the constant fear of being selected for experimentation. August Hertz's anatomical project was only one part of this dark legacy. Another doctor, Otto Bickenbach, conducted experiments involving phosgene gas, a chemical weapon responsible for tens of thousands of deaths during World War I. Bickenbach exposed prisoners to phosgene in controlled experiments to test antidotes. Victims suffered immense pain as their lungs filled with fluid. Some died quickly, others endured prolonged agony before succumbing. Similarly, Dr. Eugen Hagen conducted experiments related to typhus vaccines. He deliberately infected prisoners with typhus, then injected them with experimental treatments. Many died from fever, dehydration, or secondary infections. Survivors were often left permanently weakened. These experiments were not isolated events. They were part of a systematic program of medical torture carried out with the support of the SS, the Reich University of Strasbourg, and elements of the Nazi leadership. The camp's relative secrecy helped shield these experiments from outside scrutiny. The gas chamber at Natzweiler, a small building a short distance from the main camp, was used specifically for these experiments. Prisoners were gassed with hydrogen cyanide or chemical agents under controlled circumstances so researchers could observe their reactions. The cold calculation behind these procedures stands out even among the horrors of the Nazi regime. Despite all these hardships, prisoners continued to resist in subtle and sometimes overt ways. Many found strength in camaraderie. They supported one another emotionally and physically. They shared stories, songs, and whispered conversations during rare private moments. Cultural and national identities, though often suppressed, helped prisoners maintain a sense of self. French resistors shared memories of their homeland. Norwegian prisoners talked about the mountains of their own country. Dutch and Belgian prisoners shared news and hope from clandestine radio broadcasts they had heard before their capture. Some prisoners engaged in more active resistance. Sabotage was one of the most common forms. In factories, prisoners deliberately damaged parts, slowed assembly lines, or misaligned components. In tunnel construction, they might tamper with machinery or deliberately weaken structural supports. These actions risked severe punishment, including execution. Yet many prisoners felt compelled to do something, anything, to undermine the Nazi war effort. Acts of resistance also occurred within the camp administration. Some prisoner functionaries, those assigned administrative or supervisory roles, used their positions to help fellow inmates. They falsified records to save prisoners from execution. They hid sick prisoners during roll calls. They distributed stolen food. These individuals faced enormous risk as the SS closely monitored their activities. If suspected of helping prisoners, they could be demoted, beaten, or killed. Spiritual resilience also played a role. Religious prisoners, including Christians and Jews, found solace in prayer or clandestine worship. Some recited passages from memory. Others whispered prayers into the darkness of the barracks. These acts of faith provided comfort and strengthened the will to survive. Yet survival grew increasingly difficult as the war neared its end. In early 1944, Allied forces bombed German industrial targets more frequently. This led the Nazis to accelerate tunnel construction and forced labor programs in subcamps. Prisoners endured longer work shifts, colder conditions, and more severe punishments for any perceived inefficiency. At the same time, the main camp at Natzweiler experienced a growing influx of prisoners transferred from other camps closer to the front lines. These transfers increased overcrowding and strained limited resources. Every new wave of prisoners brought stories of the Allied advance. While such news offered hope, it also heightened danger. The SS became increasingly paranoid and brutal as they sensed defeat approaching. In June 1944, the Allied landings in Normandy signalled a dramatic shift. Within weeks, US forces were pushing across France. Resistance activity increased. The SS responded with mass arrests, sending many captured resistance fighters to Natzweiler. Among them were prominent figures of the French resistance, including members of intelligence networks, sabotage groups, and underground organizations. Many of these resistance fighters were executed shortly after arrival. The SS viewed them as especially dangerous. Executions were often carried out in the crematorium building. Prisoners were hanged or killed by injection. The secrecy of these executions made them part of the Night and Fog program's core purpose, to eliminate political opponents without leaving a trace. By August 1944, Allied troops were approaching Alsace. The SS realized that Natzweiler Struthof was no longer safe. Orders were issued to evacuate the camp. Evacuation began in early September. Prisoners were marched to nearby train stations or forced onto overcrowded trucks. Many were exhausted, starving, or sick. The journey itself became a death march. Survivors described scenes of chaos. Prisoners stumbling along mountain paths, SS guards shouting orders, the sound of gunshots as prisoners who fell behind were executed, bodies left along the roadside. Those transported by train endured suffocating conditions in sealed freight cars. Some died from dehydration. Others suffocated when too many prisoners were crammed into a single car. Most of the evacuated prisoners were sent to Dachau, Ravensbrück, or Buchenwald, camps that were themselves chaos-filled as the Nazi system collapsed. The influx of thousands of new prisoners made conditions even worse. Many of the prisoners evacuated from Natzweiler died shortly after arrival in these camps. On September 23, 1944, American soldiers from the 6th Army Group reached the empty camp. What they found shocked them. The camp had been abandoned. Documents were scattered. Personal belongings lay strewn across the barracks. The crematorium still contained ashes. The gas chamber stood intact. What the soldiers did not find were prisoners. The SS had succeeded in evacuating nearly everyone. Liberation of the camp marked the end of one chapter, but the process of uncovering the truth had only just begun. Allied investigators and French authorities immediately began examining the camp. They gathered documents, interviewed survivors, and searched the surrounding area for evidence. The discovery of the 86 Jewish bodies in Strasbourg added a new dimension to the investigation. Historians and forensic scientists worked to identify the victims, reconstruct their final days, and expose the details of August Hertz's anatomical project. In the months following liberation, France and other Allied nations began organizing war crimes trials. Several SS officers from Natzweiler were arrested. Some were tried in France. Others were extradited to other countries based on where their crimes took place. Commandant Fritz Hartjenstein and several guards were sentenced to death for their roles in executions and mistreatment of prisoners. Yet many perpetrators escaped justice. Some fled and were never found. Others resumed normal lives, their roles in the camp hidden or forgotten. Even as legal proceedings unfolded, survivors struggled to rebuild their lives. Many returned home to find their families gone, their workplaces destroyed, or their communities devastated by war. Some faced questions about their experiences that they could not bear to answer. Others found themselves unable to speak of what they had endured. Trauma lingered for decades. Yet survivors also played a crucial role in preserving the memory of Natzweiler Struthof. They wrote memoirs, gave interviews, and testified at trials. Their accounts helped historians reconstruct daily life in the camp, the brutality of the guards, the solidarity among prisoners, and the horrors of medical experiments. Without these testimonies, much of what happened at Natzweiler would have been lost to history. The French government recognized the importance of commemorating the site. In the years following the war, the camp was preserved as a memorial. The crematorium and the gas chamber were maintained. Exhibits were created to document the camp's history. Monuments honoring resistance fighters and other victims were erected. The site became a place where families could mourn, where survivors could reflect, and where visitors could learn the truth about what had happened on the mountainside. In the decades following the liberation of Natzweiler Struthof, the camp moved from a place of hidden terror to a place of remembrance and education. Its transformation into a memorial site was neither immediate nor simple. The post-war environment was filled with grief, reconstruction, and political realignment. Europe was divided, households were broken, and the memories of war echoed everywhere. Amid this atmosphere, the story of Natzweiler Struthof slowly emerged from the shadows. In the immediate aftermath of liberation, many locals in Alsace struggled to reconcile the presence of such a horrific sight so close to their villages. During the war, most civilians had been unaware of what transpired behind the fences. Rumours had circulated, of course. One cannot hide the stench of a crematorium or the unnatural movements of guarded prisoners marching through the forest. But the full truth had been obscured by the night and fog decree and by the remoteness of the site. After liberation, that ignorance gave way to shock. Many families had members who were imprisoned, killed, or forced into labour by the Nazis. Yet few knew that Natzweiler Struthof housed victims from across Europe, including some from their own communities. In the early post-war years, the site remained unused. The French military occasionally used the area for training exercises, but the camp itself was largely untouched. The buildings deteriorated, roofs sagged, wooden beams rotted, grass and weeds grew over the parade grounds and between the cracks of the barrack foundations. Yet survivors and families of victims began to return, drawn to the place where their suffering or the suffering of loved ones had taken place. They found the camp in disrepair, its silence punctuated only by the sounds of the wind and the rustling forest. These visits led to calls for preservation. Survivors worked with historians, local officials, and the French government to ensure that Natzweiler Struthof would not be forgotten. They urged the government to transform the camp into a memorial, one that would honour the dead, educate future generations, and bear witness to the atrocities committed there. By the 1950s, efforts to preserve the camp had gained momentum. In 1960, France officially recognized Natzweiler Struthof as a national memorial. This designation marked a turning point. The government began restoring key sections of the camp. The crematorium, in particular, was preserved as a stark reminder of the deaths that took place there. The gas chamber, a small, unassuming building located slightly downhill from the main camp, was also restored. Its simplicity is deceptive. The plain walls and modest structure hide the unspeakable cruelty that occurred within. Visitors who come to the site today often describe the chilling sensation they feel when stepping into the gas chamber. The knowledge that human beings were murdered there under the guise of medical experimentation lingers heavily in the air. The gas chamber is unlike the industrial killing facilities at Auschwitz or Majdanek. It is smaller, more confined, and perhaps because of this it carries a disturbing sense of intimacy. It was a laboratory of death, designed for the deliberate, methodical murder of individuals selected by Nazi scientists. The memorialization of Natzweiler Struthof involved not only preserving buildings, but also collecting documents, testimonies, and artifacts. Historians pored over wartime records. They analysed SS documents, transport lists, and administrative papers. They gathered testimonies from survivors who had endured the camp's horrors. These personal accounts became invaluable. They illuminated the daily lives of prisoners, The hunger, the fear, the camaraderie, the desperate desire to survive. One of the important discoveries made in the post-war years was the identification of the 86 Jewish victims who had been murdered for August Hertz's anatomical collection. For years, their identities had been lost. Their bodies had been discovered in Strasbourg, but the Nazis had attempted to erase the records linking them to their families. Through painstaking forensic work and archival research, historians eventually reconstructed their names and stories. These individuals, who had been reduced to scientific specimens in the eyes of Nazi doctors, had their humanity restored. Their names are now displayed at the memorial, ensuring that they are remembered not as victims of a grotesque project but as human beings with identities, families, and dreams. The process of documenting the history of Natzweiler Struthof revealed the scope of the camp's operations. Beyond the horrors of the main camp, the subcamps played a significant role in the region's wartime economy. Some subcamps were located near mines, where prisoners extracted valuable minerals. Others were beside factories, where prisoners assembled aircraft components or machined metal parts. Still others were deep in forests, where prisoners cut timber or cleared land for military use. The largest subcamps, such as Neckarelz and Schermeck, became almost self-contained worlds of suffering. These sites housed thousands of prisoners who were forced into exhausting and dangerous labor. Many were required to dig tunnels under mountains, carving out underground factories where the Nazis hoped to produce weapons safe from Allied bombing. These tunnel networks were extensive, but their construction came at a terrible human cost. Prisoners died daily from accidents, malnutrition, disease, and exhaustion. The tunnels were filled with dust that damaged their lungs. Lighting was poor. Safety precautions were non-existent. Schermeck deserves special mention as it was not technically a concentration camp, but rather a re-education camp for political prisoners. It was operated by the Gestapo and served as a holding site for individuals considered politically unreliable. Conditions were severe, and many prisoners from Schermeck were eventually sent to Natzweiler Struthof or its subcamps. Although different in classification, Schermeck was intimately connected to the broader system of political repression that fed prisoners into Natzweiler. The extensive network of subcamps made it difficult for historians to reconstruct every detail of Natzweiler's operations. Some subcamps existed only for a few months before being moved or dismantled. Others were so small that they left few traces behind. Many prisoners died before they could share their stories. Nonetheless, the broader picture that emerges is one of systematic exploitation, an attempt by the Nazi regime to use every available prisoner as a source of labor until they could work no more. After the war, as histories of the camp were written, survivors played a crucial role in shaping the narrative. Their testimonies brought to life the daily realities of the camp, the hunger that gnawed at their stomachs, the cold that seeped into their bones, the fear of selection for execution or experimentation, the endless labor, and the rare moments of human connection that gave them strength. Many survivors described how they formed small groups of mutual support. These groups shared food, protected each other from violence, and helped sick prisoners during roll call. Such solidarity was often the only thing that prevented complete despair. Yet survivors also spoke about the psychological torment of imprisonment. They described the humiliation of being stripped of their identities, reduced to numbers, forced to obey arbitrary and brutal rules. They spoke of the constant presence of death. Every day, prisoners saw their fellow inmates collapse from exhaustion, succumb to disease, or be killed by guards. The crematorium's smoke was a persistent reminder of their own fragile mortality. One of the most horrifying aspects of camp life was the constant fear of medical selection. Prisoners never knew when they might be chosen for experimentation. The mere sight of certain doctors instilled terror. Survivors recounted how prisoners tried to avoid attracting attention by appearing healthy and alert even when they were ill. They hid symptoms of disease. They supported each other during roll call, trying to stand upright and avoid being noticed by SS physicians. The psychological scars of these experiences lasted a lifetime. Many survivors struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and depression for decades. Some found it difficult to talk about their experiences, even with close family members. Others felt compelled to speak, believing that testimony was the only way to honor the dead and prevent such atrocities from happening again. As the generations grew older, survivors began to worry about the preservation of memory. Who would tell their stories when they were gone? Who would ensure that the truth about Natzweiler Struthof endured? These concerns motivated many survivors to share their experiences with schools, museums, and historical organizations. They gave interviews, they wrote memoirs, they participated in ceremonies at the memorial site. Their voices became an essential part of the historical record. The French government, recognizing the importance of memory, invested in the development of the Centre Européen du Résistant Déporté, the European Centre of the Deported Resistance Fighter. This educational and memorial centre, located at the site of the camp, commemorates the many resistance fighters who were imprisoned at Natzweiler Struthof. It also serves as a broader educational tool to teach visitors about the dangers of totalitarianism, racism, and political repression. The centre includes exhibits that trace the rise of Nazism, the implementation of discriminatory laws, the formation of resistance movements, and the role of concentration camps in suppressing opposition. Testimonies, photographs, and artifacts bring these historical narratives to life. The museum emphasizes not only the suffering inflicted at the camp, but also the courage of those who resisted. Walking through the museum and the remains of the camp, visitors pass through spaces where unimaginable suffering once took place. The Appellplatz, where prisoners once stood for hours in freezing winds, is now a quiet, open area. The barrack foundations, overgrown with grass, hint at the overcrowded living conditions. The crematorium, preserved as it was, is a haunting reminder of the deaths carried out under SS supervision. The gas chamber, though small, carries an oppressive atmosphere that many visitors struggle to shake. The memorial site serves not only as a historical location, but also as a moral warning. It reminds visitors of what happens when hatred is institutionalized, when the rule of law collapses, when human beings are dehumanized, and when science is corrupted by ideology. The story of Natzweiler Struthof underscores how easily such a system can emerge and how important it is to defend human rights. The lessons from Natzweiler are not confined to the past. They remain relevant in a world where political extremism, racism, and authoritarianism continue to pose threats. The memorial challenges visitors to confront uncomfortable truths about human cruelty and to consider their own responsibilities as citizens of free societies. One of the most poignant aspects of the memorial is the way it honors the diversity of the camp's victims. Natzweiler Struthof held prisoners from more than 20 different countries. French resistance fighters were the largest group, but prisoners also came from Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Germany, Poland, the Soviet Union, and other nations. Jews, Roma, political dissidents, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and many others were held there. The camp was a microcosm of the wider Nazi persecution machine. Remembering these diverse victims is essential. Each group suffered uniquely under Nazi rule. Each had its own story. The memorial site includes plaques and monuments dedicated to these various groups, recognizing both their suffering and their resilience. The story of the 86 Jewish victims murdered for August Hertz's anatomical project remains one of the most tragic and disturbing elements of the camp's history. Their identities, once lost, have been restored. Their names are displayed at the memorial. Their story is recounted in exhibits and historical texts. Their memory serves as a powerful reminder of the lengths to which Nazi ideology sought to dehumanize and destroy. The restoration of their identities also highlights the importance of historical research. Without the dedication of historians, forensic scientists, archivists, and families, These individuals might have remained anonymous forever. Their identification stands as a testament to the vital work of preserving memory, honoring victims, and seeking truth. As modern visitors walk through the memorial site, they are often struck by the contrast between the beauty of the landscape and the horror that took place there. The mountains are still, the air is crisp, the forests are peaceful. Yet beneath this tranquility lies a history of suffering that must not be forgotten. Visitors might find themselves imagining the prisoners marching to the quarry, stumbling under the weight of granite blocks. They might picture the roll calls on the sloping square, where hundreds stood shivering in thin uniforms. They might imagine the narrow bunks in overcrowded barracks, the smell of sickness, the sound of coughing during the night. They might feel the chilling silence inside the crematorium or the suffocating tension inside the gas chamber. Standing in these spaces, the past feels close. The stories of the dead whisper through the wind. The weight of history presses gently but insistently on the heart. It is this emotional resonance that gives Natzweiler Struthof its power as a memorial. It is a place where history is not merely observed but experienced, a place where memory becomes a living force. It challenges visitors to confront the reality of the past, to reflect on the nature of human cruelty, and to consider the importance of vigilance against hatred. At the same time, Natzweiler Struthof is also a place of humanity. Despite all the suffering that occurred there, the camp is filled with stories of courage, solidarity, and hope. Prisoners who risked their lives to help others. Resistance fighters who continued to defy their captors. Individuals who held onto their dignity despite relentless attempts to strip it away. These stories remind us that even in the darkest places, human beings can find ways to resist evil. They can choose compassion over cruelty, solidarity over selfishness, and courage over fear. The legacy of Natzweiler Struthof thus encompasses both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human resilience. It is a site where memory serves both as a warning and as an inspiration. It teaches us that history must be remembered, not to dwell on suffering, but to understand its causes and prevent its repetition. To conclude the story of Natzweiler Struthof is to recognize that its impact continues. The survivors who testified ensured that the camp would not fade into obscurity. Historians who researched the site helped uncover the truth. Educators who teach its history help new generations understand the dangers of hatred. And visitors who walk its grounds carry its lessons with them. Natzweiler Struthof stands today as a solemn reminder of the destruction wrought by totalitarianism, racism, and the dehumanization of individuals. Its memorial teaches the importance of protecting human rights, resisting oppression, and defending the dignity of all people. It is a place where silence speaks volumes, a place where the wind carries the weight of memory. A place where the past lives on, not as a relic, but as a moral call to vigilance. Its story is a testament to the importance of remembrance and a reminder that the struggle for justice and dignity is never complete. The camp's existence urges us to reflect, not only on what happened there, but on the world we build today. It challenges us to recognize early signs of intolerance, to reject ideologies that divide and dehumanize, and to stand resolutely for the principles of freedom, equality, and humanity. In this way, Natzweiler Struthof is not only a memorial to the past, but also a guide for the future. It calls upon each of us to preserve memory, uphold truth, and ensure that the horrors committed on that mountainside are never allowed to emerge again. If you found this video meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more people hear and remember these stories.